deal with, we create new crimes. We create a crime that the governor doesn't deal with, for instance, of civil rights murder. Under the governor's bill, the Howard Beach type situation would have been, again, a manslaughter conviction, because you're just not going to make it anymore. Under our bill, if you cause the death of somebody, either intentionally or negligently or by any other means, you would be held to the standard of similar to negligent, to depraved indifferent homicide, and you could get 25 to life. The heaviest, the stiffest sentence handed out in Howard Beach is, I think, John Lester got 10 to 30. So under our bill, we would create that new crime. The gentleman who was killed in Staten Island, I believe, for because of his sexual orientation or their perception of his sexual orientation, those people, should they come before a bar of justice, would be, under this bill, could be charged with civil rights murder. Well, again, good point. Who knows the monetary recovery you can get in this state if you sued somebody for a civil rights violation in a public accommodation, what your monetary ceiling would be, your recovery. If after you went through a whole long Supreme Court trial, how much could you recover? Anybody know? Yeah, but the statute says you can get 500. You can get $500. Spend about $50,000 on attorney fees. Probably take about 5 years to litigate. You can get $500. Our bill would expand that. Our bill would move that type of act into a more general scheme of the law. There are civil rights laws in the books in New York, for instance. Aggravated harassment is generally the civil rights crime. It is an A misdemeanor. Generally, if somebody was convicted of aggravated harassment, they get 3 years probation. I've never seen or heard of anyone getting a year in jail for aggravated harassment for no other reasons, with nothing else happening in this state. You know, if it was just aggravated harassment alone, I've never heard of anybody going to jail. They might have, but if it's aggravated harassment coupled with an assault, sure. But just for the average civil rights violation, aggravated harassment, I've never heard of anybody going to jail for a year. Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm not sure they defend it. If anybody, I don't know if the microphone can pick it up. The question is, how does the Senate defend their position that they're not supporting it because our bill would protect gays? I didn't say they defend it. I said that's their reason. The line that I've heard is that they don't want to have it on the books that the state of New York somehow condones homosexuality. I believe that is the official party line that the Republican Senate is handing out. Again, you can take it for what it's worth. Yes, sir. Well, who here thinks that somebody should be brutalized because of their race or religion or any other accident of birth, as I mentioned before? Nobody's in favor of that. Well, very few people. But there is a belief going. If I don't know how many people in this room are old enough to remember when Barry Goldwater ran for president in 1964. Oh God. If you remember, the discussion was back then that there was no need for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because we've got enough laws in the books to cover it. That's the argument that's going around now. We've got enough laws in the books to cover it. You could always bring somebody up on a simple assault charge, and then the law could deal with them because of that. One of the problems related to that is, who's going to make the arrest? The police? I should tell you, I was an assistant DA for 6 years. Some of the police who I came in contact with, I would not want investigating a civil rights case. Some of the police that I came in contact with were the cause of civil rights violations. So one of the most controversial aspect of our bill is our demand for a special prosecutor. How can a prosecutor, how can John Santucci or Robert Morgenthau or Joe Hines or any of the other prosecutors in this city or in this state work with the police one day and bring drug cases and assault cases and robbery cases one day, and then, as Hines did in Brooklyn, prosecute people for negligent homicide? Who are your witnesses going to be? How badly did they excoriate Elizabeth Holtzman when she was the district attorney in Brooklyn for trying cops for brutality? It got so the cops didn't want to work with her. Now, how is somebody going to turn around and with those same cops prosecute civil rights cases? One of the things that we require is the need for a special prosecutor, a statewide special prosecutor with his own staff, with his own investigators, with full police power, and with the ability to bring this case in any court in the state. The governor's bill, and this is the biggest difference, does not allow that. Again, the governor, from what I understand, his excuse is that it would take the power away from some elected officials, i.e. the district attorneys. Well, if they're not doing their job, if they're not protecting me, why should we protect them? Yes, sir. State Attorney, the question is, why can the State Attorney General be the person vested with the power to prosecute civil rights cases? Well, he does have that power, firstly. But secondly, the State Attorney General would have the same problem. One of the most vocal, now I'm not saying his politics are good or bad, but one of the most vocal opponents of the Attorney General is the Reverend Al Sharpton, who the Attorney General is trying downtown as we speak. Now, how is the Attorney General going to go to the Reverend Mr. Sharpton and say, well, I want you and your community groups to work with me on this case at 5:01. I'm going to try to put you in jail at 4:59, but I want you to work with us at 5:01 to keep the community quiet and let us prosecute, or let us find out if there is what the story is in the Tawana Brawley situation, for instance. It's very difficult to do it. It's extremely difficult to do it. And I'm sure most of the people here are law students. I'm sure one of the things you learned about is conflicts of interest. It's a major problem. If you've got a profound conflict of interest to try a case, you can't do it. So it would be prudent to have a special prosecutor. They have special prosecutors for Medicaid abuse. If you hand in a phony prescription, you could be prosecuted by a specialized state attorney general, Kuriansky. They have a special prosecutor for organized crime. They have a special prosecutor, or they had a special prosecutor for police corruption, Hines, but I understand they eliminated that office. And there's a fourth special prosecutor. They've had special prosecutors for waterfront violations. For some strange reason, violation of civil rights has not been deemed important enough to have special prosecutors. You tell me the reason. I don't know. Yes, ma'am. We would generally protect people because of their religion, their race, their identifiable ethnic group, their sexual orientation, we'd protect everybody. We went out of our way not to exclude anybody. Yeah, age, disability, gender. I am not the only author of this. It was co-authored by Senator Patterson, Randolph Scott McLaughlin, who is a noted civil rights attorney, Supreme Court Justice Kenneth Brown of Queens, Basil Patterson, who's a noted attorney, and my brother Ernest Hart, who's also an attorney, and Sheila Green from Senator Patterson's staff. We tried to cover everybody. Yes, sir. I believe so. I believe so. Generally, though, in gender is more important for the purpose of this bill in terms of employment discrimination. We were talking earlier, for instance, about separate pay, disparate pay for women. That's a civil rights issue. That's an issue that must be dealt with by legislation. Our bill would deal with that, or our expanded bill would deal with that, to make sure that women don't continue to get 61 cents for every dollar, that white male high school graduates don't continue to earn more than black male college graduates. You know, it's part of an ongoing course of conduct that we're trying to deal with. Most of the civil rights bill, in fact, no other civil rights legislation introduced anywhere in this country is as broad as ours is, or as broad as ours will be in the future. Yes, sir. Get more Democrats in the state Senate. The question is, what is our strategy to get it pushed through? If the Democrats control the state Senate, and it's a flippant answer, but it's also the truth, the Democratic politicians generally are more favorable to this type of legislation than the Republican politicians. No great strategy there. Yes, sir. You have to speak up so the microphone can pick you up. Well, but the problem we have with the gay and lesbian groups is that while we're protecting them, they're not protecting us. Now, what do I mean by that? The excuse given by the Republican Senate that they will not pass this bill is because it protects gays and lesbians. The gays and lesbians support Roy Goodman's bill. We're fighting for their rights to make sure they get covered with the Patterson bill, and then they turn around and support the weaker bill that the Republicans, some of the Republicans, are trying to push. Why? I don't know. If the Goodman's bill is similar to the governor's bill, it's not as strong. Now, unless I've gotten something, unless there is some new information, that is the last thing I heard with the support of the bill. It's not that they don't support this bill, it's that they're supporting the Goodman bill too. which simply doesn't protect their rights as well as ours does. Yes, sir. From what I understand, and I'm not as up on this as, because I've only heard this within the last 2 or 3 weeks, some of the organized groups in the state, I don't know, organized gay and lesbian groups, I don't know the names. If I misspeak, I would have to apologize on that. I don't know the precise groups. Though I do know that upon information and belief from Senator Patterson, because I speak to him all the time, that the coalition of gay and lesbian groups are backing Senator Goodman's bill. I didn't mean any offense. If you took offense at what I'm saying, I didn't use they as a pejorative. What I did say is that we are not I'm not going to explain my answer, except that what I am saying was that we will continue to push for our bill in its entirety, protecting everyone. We will not allow our bill to be used to discriminate against anyone. And we would expect those member groups that we try to protect to realize that we are trying to protect all groups. It's a point well taken. Mm-hmm. Well, if to give you a little of the politics, if you remember that many of the most repressive people within the Reagan administration, Terry Dolan, Congressman Bauman, they were the biggest opponents of civil rights legislation that would have protected them. That's not what I said. That might be a truism, but I mean, Terry Dolan was the head of NICPAC. Try to get civil rights legislation through NICPAC. And Terry Dolan died of AIDS. Try to get AIDS support money through, well, NICPAC I think went out of business, but I wouldn't have seen them as a strong support group for any sort of AIDS funding. Our bill, as we expand it, would seek to have more state money for AIDS research. Well, it's hard to be. Well, one of the things, if you want to look at civil rights movements, a little background, one of the things that the gay community or any other community fighting civil rights must realize is you can't let the media tell you who your leaders are. I mean, if the media, like you always hear Roy Innis being described as a African-American leader. I mean, you know, you always see a microphone, and Morton Downey was great. I mean, people used to look, and Roy Innis would get a microphone shoved in his face every single time that something happened. Or when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, remember there was a big press announcement that Ralph David Abernathy was supporting him. I mean, people people forgot at that time that Ralph Abernathy was even alive. But it was a big civil rights leader, and we found out, unfortunately, last year that the brother had some serious problems. So if you or any group allows the media to tell you who your leaders are, what I'm saying is that Senator Patterson and our supporters, we will seek to continue to protect all the groups, all the aggrieved groups, even if sometimes they don't see those groups don't see the prudence in helping us support them. Yes, sir. When I'm a country lawyer, you tell me initials, but I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. I hope to support our bill. I hope to support our bill. If it's my understanding of any perceived differences, then I will stand corrected. But I hope that they're going up there and lend their support financially if we need to mount some sort of a drive to get this. There is no fundraising activity going on. Morally, and with your vote, and with your lobbying activity, if you're a member of that group. Don't support the weaker bill. Yep, I hope this is all getting on the microphone. Okay. Well, probably the structure on any committee like that is the most negotiable thing in a bill. I would imagine that the greater majority of the members would be appointed by the governor, but as you know, the governor would get strong input from the various communities around the state. I don't see that as being a great problem. The governor couldn't appoint, it's unlikely that the governor would appoint 20 WASP males to such a group. It's unlikely that whoever would appoint that group would appoint people who aren't at least a majority in the members of the protected groups, of the groups we're trying to protect. I don't remember seeing it in the governor's legislation. Our bill would like I said, our bill is a bill in transition. We need input from bright minds like yours who, I know you're studying the law books, and I studied law for, I didn't use any Gilberts or anything like that. I studied hard. I read all my case notes, and I read all the, I don't even know what Prosser is. But we need some input from you folks. Yes, sir. You have to speak up. Make believe this is a courtroom. Speak loudly so the entire jury can hear you. Well, let's go into the Socratic method. You're in law school, sir? What's your name, sir? Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones, stand up. Mr. Jones, are you from Manhattan? Are you from where? Okay. In Queens, there are a whole bunch of apartment buildings on Queens Boulevard, right? And all those buildings or many of those buildings are being converted to condominiums or co-ops. Now, who do you think could afford those buildings? Homeless people? Well, who? Well, people of means. Is that true? Now, if there is a situation where a building is vacant, say, for 2 or 3 apartments, and somebody who is homeless comes, or someone who's without means comes to apply for an apartment in that building, if the apartments are being warehoused, what are the chances of that person getting the apartment? Well, wait a minute. Now, to be a person of means, if you've been discriminated against in getting a job, if you can't get that job in Wilkie Farr or Mudge Rose or some other major law firm, and you unfortunately have to work as a lowly assistant DA and you only get $30,000 a year, can you afford that apartment? To buy it? So if you are the victim of discrimination in employment, would it stand to reason that you could become then a victim of discrimination in housing because you wouldn't be able to afford the housing, even if you're a middle-class person, a middle-class lawyer? So, okay, now that you agree, now what's your question? Which federal government? The Ronald Reagan, George Bush federal government? We're citing them for civil rights. Do you think you have a right to housing? You have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Will you be happy if you're standing outside in the rain or in the snow and you've got the New York Times covering your head instead of 4 walls and a roof? Are we trying to expand on what the federal government thinks should be our rights? Yes. And why shouldn't we? That's what we're trying to do. That's precisely what we're trying to do. It goes beyond a racial issue. That's precisely what I've been saying. It's a racial issue, but it goes beyond a racial issue. It's a form of bias. Warehousing is a form of bias. If you don't have a job, or if you don't have a job that pays enough money to buy that condo or buy that co-op, then when they start warehousing, you're even further back. If you had access to that $75,000 or $80,000 a year job, sure, you could afford the apartment. But if you don't have access to the apartment, there is no way that warehousing is going to help you. It's going to take apartments off the market. So you're going to have to look for inferior quarters to live in. When you look at it as a continuum, it is a civil rights issue. Ask anyone in a neighborhood that has been regentrified if it's not a civil rights issue. When I went to law school in Washington, I lived in what's called New Southwest. New Southwest, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, in Washington, maybe a mile from the White House, the streets had not even been paved. Now, under urban redevelopment, it is I think yuppie is still a word in our general vernacular. It is one of the yuppie places to live. Buildings that were projects are now somehow got reborn as yuppie condos. Civil rights issue? The people who lived in that community, who kept that community viable for 100 years, they can't afford to live there. Georgetown. What's the property book? The red property book? No, the standard property book. Anyway, there's a case in the property book, the textbook, that talks about the neighborhood they describe as Georgetown. And it's described as a ghetto. Georgetown, up until about 1955, was a African-American ghetto. Then it got regentrified. It is not an African-American ghetto now. It's a civil rights issue. If those people in Washington had jobs, could they have been moved out of the places they had lived in for 100 years? Probably not. Yes, sir. Oh, you're right. How many people, we all read in the book that Columbus discovered America, or maybe Leif Erikson discovered America. How can you discover someplace that people are already living in? But in answer to your question, there are groups going around to Bensonhurst, and they are trying to re-educate people as to the pluralism of this society. Also, recently, the Board of Regents of this state firmed up the requirement for African American education given throughout the schools in this state. So we are trying to deal, or the state is trying to deal with your concerns. Excuse me? It's more of a yeah. Well, context I heard it in. The loudest group was African American, but it is. They decided to broaden the multicultural education in the state because when I was in high school, we had 1 day worth of African American history, a book written by a man named Katz, who probably was not an African American. You know, there is room for growth, but the state is dealing with your concerns. Our bill is consistent with that. Yes, ma'am.